coach humiliated Alexis Olympia Hanian, not realizing who her mother was. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the living room as Serena Williams sat cross-legged on the couch, flipping through an old leather photo album. The scent of lavender and fresh coffee blended in the air, creating a calm contrast to the storm brewing inside her. Beside her, little Alexis Olympia Hanian traced the edges of the photos with her fingers, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Was this really you, Mom?" she asked, holding up a shot of Serena mid-swing, beads flying, eyes locked in focus. "That's me," Serena smiled, though the photo stirred up old wounds, boos from the crowd, whispers just loud enough to sting. But she pushed those memories aside. This moment was about Alexis. "You look unstoppable," the girl whispered, almost like the image still held power. Serena gently tucked a curl behind Alexis's ear. "I wasn't always. I had to fight for it. Really fight." Alexis looked up, her voice steady. "I want to fight too. I want to be just like you." Serena's heart swelled and ached. She had dreamt of this day. But she knew the price, the pressure, the judgment, the hate. "Being like me isn't easy," she said softly. "It takes more than talent. It takes grit, strength, and sometimes standing alone when the world turns its back." "I can do that," Alexis said, straightening her shoulders. The fire in her eyes made Serena proud, but nervous. Did she really understand what that meant? Later that day, as golden sunlight faded into the kitchen, Serena and her husband Alexis Ohanian sat surrounded by resumes and coach profiles. He scrolled through videos while she scanned papers. "She needs someone tough," Serena said. "She's 10, he reminded her without looking up. "Exactly. This is the age when discipline matters most." He paused, then looked at her. "Is this about her, or about you?" Serena opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Was she projecting her past onto their daughter? She shook the doubt away. Alexis wanted this. She was sure. "There's one more name," her husband said, clicking on a video. "Nick Harper." Serena tensed. That name. He trained champions, but also left a trail of broken players. A genius to some, a tyrant to others. "He's the best," she said. "He's also controversial." They watched as Nick barked at teenagers, his voice sharp, his eyes cold. "That's what she needs," Serena said. "No sugarcoating. No excuses." Reluctantly, Alexis nodded. "I'll schedule a meeting." 2 days later, Serena and Alexis stood at the gates of an elite tennis academy. Alexis clutched her racket tightly. "You ready?" Serena asked. Alexis nodded. Inside, Nick Harper was waiting, clipboard in hand, face as stern as his reputation. His handshake was strong, his gaze lingering on Serena a little too long, like he was measuring her legacy. "So this is your daughter," he said, looking down at Alexis. "She's small." Alexis's face fell, but only for a second. She pulled her shoulders back. "She's strong," Serena replied firmly. Nick shrugged. "We'll see." The first session began immediately. No warm-up, no smiles. Just sprints and commands. "Faster!" Nick shouted. "You're not here to look pretty, you're here to win." Alexis's legs burned, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't. Serena watched from the sidelines, heart twisting. This is what she'd asked for, but something felt off. "Water break," Nick said at last. Alexis reached for her bottle. "You're wasting time," he snapped. "Don't think I can't see you dragging your feet." The words hit harder than any missed shot. Alexis's shoulders dropped, but she didn't quit. She straightened up and ran back onto the court. Later, Nick pulled Serena aside. "She's got potential," he said flatly. "But only if she stops acting like a spoiled princess." Serena's eyes narrowed. "She's not spoiled?" Maybe not yet, Nick said with a shrug. But kids like her, famous parents, easy lives, they don't know what it means to really fight. We'll see if she can handle it. Serena wanted to fire back, but part of her hated how much those words echoed something she feared deep down. That night, Alexis lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, her body aching, her skin still warm from the sunburn, but her thoughts racing. Nick didn't believe in her. He didn't think she was strong enough. "I'll prove him wrong," she whispered into the dark. She closed her eyes and imagined herself on a podium, a trophy raised above her head, the crowd roaring as Nick stood silent in the background, forced to eat his own words. She fell asleep with that image burned into her mind. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered back, "What if he's right?" The next morning, long shadows stretched across the court as Alexis stood at the baseline, gripping her racket so tight her knuckles turned white. Her legs still burned from yesterday's drills, but she kept moving. Nick Harper paced the sidelines like a hawk. "Footwork, Alexis." "You're dragging again," he barked, slamming his clipboard against his palm. "You think this is a dance class? Get those knees up." Alexis flinched, but didn't stop. She pushed harder, sweat stinging her eyes. She wasn't Serena Williams' daughter today. She wasn't a kid with a billionaire dad. She was a girl with something to prove. But no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed good enough. "Stop," Nick called suddenly. Alexis froze, chest heaving. He walked toward her slowly, each step echoing across the court. "You're too soft. Too slow. If you can't handle this, you are wasting my time." Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let the tears fall. She nodded and waited for the next drill. Nick smirked. "That's what I thought." Days blurred into each other, one brutal session after another. Nick tore into her game, piece by piece. Her grip? Wrong. Her stance? Weak. Even how she breathed between serves wasn't good enough. "You're trying too hard," he snapped one day, throwing his clipboard onto the bench. "Stop acting like you care what people think. Nobody cares about you. They care about winners." The words hit deeper than any bruise. That night, Alexis replayed his insults in her head. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not strong enough. But quitting? That was never an option. And the other kids didn't make it easier. From day one, they treated her like she didn't belong. "She's only here 'cause of her mom," one girl sneered. "I heard her dad's a billionaire," another added. "Bet she doesn't even pay for lessons." Alexis kept walking, pretending she didn't hear. But the words clung to her skin like sweat. During practice, no one wanted to pair with her. They laughed when she missed. One afternoon, in the middle of a match, an older girl launched a serve straight at Alexis and slammed her shoulder. The impact knocked her down. Her racket flew. "Oops," the girl smirked. "Maybe next time pay attention." Nick stood by, arms crossed. He said nothing. Alexis picked up her racket and kept playing, but her chest burned with humiliation. At home, Serena noticed the change almost instantly. Alexis became quieter, withdrawn. She spent hours hitting balls in the backyard until her arms gave out. One evening, Serena found her sitting on the bed, staring at her blistered hands. "Alexis," she said softly. Alexis jerked up, quickly hiding her hands. "I'm fine, Mom." Serena sat beside her. "You don't look fine." "It's just practice," Alexis mumbled. "Nick says I need to work harder." Serena felt a flicker of doubt, but pushed it down. Nick was tough for a reason. Toughness built champions. "You're strong," she said, squeezing her daughter's shoulder. "You've got this." Alexis tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, Nick pushed her harder than ever. He made her run suicides until her legs nearly gave out, then forced her to do volleys until her arms shook. "Pathetic," he muttered after one missed return. Her face flushed, but she kept going. Later, as she caught her breath, Nick walked over with that same cold stare. "You don't have what it takes," he said flatly. "Not yet." Alexis looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then help me get there." Nick paused, tilting his head. "We'll see if you're ready to stop acting like some spoiled little princess and start acting like a competitor." The days grew longer, the pressure heavier. Alexis started waking up with a knot in her stomach, dreading what the next practice would bring. She barely spoke at dinner. Her mind was somewhere else, stuck in drills, mistakes, and Nick's voice echoing in her head. Serena watched her daughter from across the table, torn between two emotions, pride and worry. She wanted to believe that Nick's methods were working, that Alexis was becoming tougher, sharper. But the shadows under her eyes told another story. Then came the tournament. The moment Alexis had been training for. A chance to finally prove herself. But the second she stepped onto the court, everything unraveled. Her opponent was older, faster, and far more experienced. Within minutes, Alexis was down badly. Her serves were wild. Her returns lacked power. Her confidence slipping away by the second. Nick stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, disappointment written all over his face. "Focus," he shouted as she missed another shot. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Alexis felt her chest tighten. She tried to zone them out, but the pressure, Nick's expectations, the stares, the noise, crushed her. By the end of the match, she had lost in straight sets. Nick didn't wait for her to walk off the court. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "You embarrassed yourself out there." I tried," she said, her voice small. "Try harder," he snapped. "Or go home." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not in front of him. That night, Alexis lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached. Her heart felt heavier than ever. No matter what she did, it was never enough. Nick didn't believe in her. The other kids didn't respect her. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. She sat curled up in the corner of the locker room the next day, knees drawn to her chest. Laughter echoed from outside. Voices she recognized. Her loss had been more than just a defeat, it had been public. Her fingers traced the worn grooves of her racket handle. Every mistake from the match replayed in her mind. The bad serves. The missed volleys. The awkward applause. The cold way Nick turned his back. Then, the door creaked open. A group of older girls walked in, their laughter cutting through the air like blades. She lowered her head, hoping they wouldn't notice. But they did. "Look who's hiding," one of them said. Madison. One of Nick's top players. She leaned against the locker, arms folded. "How's it feel to let everyone down?" Alexis gripped her racket tighter, but stayed silent. "She probably thought her mommy would save her," another girl added, and the others laughed. "Yeah, must be nice having Serena Williams fight your battles," Madison said with a sneer. "Too bad it didn't help you win." Alexis's cheeks burned. She wanted to say something. Anything. But her voice wouldn't come. Instead, she stood up abruptly, shoved her racket into her bag, and turned to leave. "Running away already?" Madison called out. Alexis didn't answer. But their laughter followed her out the door like a shadow. Nick was waiting outside the gym. Arms crossed. Same unreadable expression. "You're late," he said coldly. No excuses, he cut her off. "You embarrassed yourself today. And if you think I'm going to coddle you because of who your mom is, you're wrong." Alexis flinched at the mention of her mother. "Get on the court." She dropped her bag and obeyed. No warm-up. No rest. Just drills. Relentless, punishing drills. Faster. Eyes up. Stop acting like a scared little girl. Every word hit like a punch. But she didn't stop. She kept running, swinging, pushing, until her legs finally gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the court. Nick stood over her, his shadow long and sharp. "Pathetic," he muttered, and walked away. That night, Alexis sat at the dinner table, barely touching her food. Serena watched her closely. Her shoulders were slumped, the spark in her eyes gone. "How was practice?" Serena asked gently. Alexis shrugged. "Fine." "Alexis." She looked up, and for a split second, Serena saw it. That raw, broken look in her daughter's eyes. But just as quickly, it vanished. "I said I'm fine," Alexis repeated. Serena's jaw tensed. She wanted to press, to really ask what was going on. But part of her was afraid of the answer. So instead, she started talking about her own training days, the long nights, the sacrifices, the pain. Alexis nodded along, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The next day brought more of the same. During practice, Alexis was matched against Madison. The older girl came out aggressive, hammering shots into the corners, making Alexis run nonstop. Nick watched the whole thing, saying nothing. Then it happened. Madison slammed a forehand, not toward the line, not toward the court, but straight at Alexis's body. Alexis reacted too late. The ball slammed into her arm, knocking the racket clean from her grip. Laughter erupted around the court. "Nice reflexes, superstar," Madison sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Alexis bent down, hands shaking, to retrieve her racket. She waited for Nick to say something, to call out Madison for the obvious cheap shot. But he didn't. Instead, he smirked. "Get up," he said coldly. "You're not done." Off the court, things only got worse. The bullying followed her into the locker room, the hallways, even water breaks. Rich girl can't handle the heat. Maybe she should stick to modeling. She'll never be as good as her mom. Alexis tried to block it all out, but their words stuck like burrs to her skin. So she practiced harder, stayed late, ran drills alone. She pounded ball after ball against the wall until her hands blistered and bled, driven by one thought: prove them wrong. But no matter how much she pushed, Nick never seemed satisfied. At home, Serena saw the change. Alexis stopped talking. She skipped meals. She'd wake up crying from nightmares she refused to explain. Then one evening, Serena found her outside in the dark, still practicing. "Alexis," Serena called. No answer. "Alexis." The ball hit the net. Alexis turned, eyes wild and shining with tears. "I have to get better," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't let him win." Serena froze. "Who?" she asked. But Alexis didn't answer. She dropped to her knees, shoulders shaking. Serena rushed over, wrapping her arms around her. "It's okay," she whispered. But the words rang hollow. The breaking point came a week later. During practice, Nick stopped everything, just to humiliate her. "You'll never be good enough," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're weak. And everyone here knows it." It wasn't just the words. It was the look in his eyes, like she wasn't even worth the air he wasted. Alexis dropped her racket and walked off. "Where do you think you're going?" Nick called after her. She didn't look back. That night, Serena walked into her daughter's room and found her crying. "Talk to me," she said softly. And this time, Alexis did. She told her everything. The insults, the bullying, the way Nick stood by and let it happen, or worse, joined in. How he made her feel small, worthless, invisible. Serena listened, her rage boiling beneath the surface. She had trusted Nick to build her daughter up. Instead, he had torn her down. "It's over," Serena said firmly. "We're done with him." Alexis looked up, her eyes wide. But what about? No, Serena cut her off. No more. And for the first time in weeks, Alexis exhaled. She could breathe. On the drive home from the academy, Alexis sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, the world passing in a blur. Neither of them spoke. Serena's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her knuckles pale against the leather. Alexis's heart still pounded, Nick's words looping in her mind. "You'll never be good enough." When they got home, Serena turned off the engine and looked at her. Inside, Alexis followed her through the house, into the living room. Serena paced, arms crossed, fire in her eyes. "Sit." Alexis obeyed, sinking into the couch. "Tell me everything," Serena demanded. "No more hiding. No more pretending." Alexis hesitated, but there was no escape from that look. So she told her. Every word. Every cruel moment. The taunts, the drills, the humiliation. How the other kids ganged up on her. How Nick let it happen. How he made her feel worthless. Serena's face hardened with every sentence. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked when Alexis finished. "I didn't want you to think I was weak," Alexis whispered. Serena dropped to her knees in front of her daughter and took her hands in her own. "You are not weak," she said fiercely. "Don't you ever let anyone make you believe that." Tears spilled from Alexis's eyes, and this time, she let them. That night, after Alexis had gone to bed, Serena sat alone in her study. She began digging. Old articles. Past interviews. Every whisper about Nick Harper she had ignored. There were complaints. Rumors. Stories of other students who had quit under his watch. Verbal abuse. Even accusations of inappropriate comments. But none of it had stuck. He was protected by his image, the man who built champions. Serena's hands trembled as she closed her laptop. She had trusted him. She had put her daughter in his hands. Never again. The next morning, Serena walked back into the academy. Heels clicking like a warning down the polished hallway. Nick was in his office, leaning back like nothing had happened. Smug as ever. "Serena," he said, arms spread like they were old friends. "Come to apologize for your daughter's performance yesterday?" She slammed the door shut behind her. "You think this is a joke?" she snapped. "You think you can talk to my daughter like that? Break her down? Humiliate her? And just walk away?" Nick's smile faltered for a second, but he straightened. "Don't act like you don't know how this works," he said. "Tennis isn't for the weak. You didn't get where you are by being coddled. Or did you forget?" Serena stepped closer. Her voice dropped, low and dangerous. "I never forgot. But I didn't need someone like you to tear me apart just to build me back up." Nick narrowed his eyes. "You want to pull her out? Go ahead. But we both know she'll never make it without me." Serena stared at him. Not moving. Not blinking. Her heart pounded. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. In the days that followed, Serena Williams began speaking out. She gave interviews, posted statements, and revealed the truth about what her daughter, Alexis Olympia, had endured. Her words hit hard. They sparked something bigger, a nationwide conversation about abusive coaching, power dynamics, and the hidden cost of chasing greatness. And then, more voices joined in. Former students of Nick Harper came forward. Their stories painted a haunting picture of a man who didn't build champions, he broke people. Nick tried to defend himself, brushing off the claims as exaggerations from kids who couldn't handle pressure. But the floodgates were already open. While the world talked, Alexis struggled. Part of her felt relief, she was finally free from Nick's control. But another part? That part still felt like she'd failed. She spent hours in the backyard hitting balls into the practice wall until her arms throbbed. She said it was training, but deep down, she knew it was punishment. One night, Serena walked out to the court. "You don't have to prove anything," she said gently. "Yes, I do," Alexis whispered. "To myself." Serena studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's do it right." She found a new coach, someone who understood discipline, but also compassion. At first, Alexis flinched at even the gentlest feedback. But slowly, the walls began to come down. Her new coach focused on fundamentals, helping her unlearn the damage done by Nick's toxic training. It wasn't easy, but with every session, the voice in her head that said "you're not good enough" got a little quieter. Meanwhile, Nick Harper's downfall came quickly. More stories. More evidence. The Tennis Federation launched a formal investigation. He was suspended. Sponsors dropped him. Parents pulled their kids out of his academy. Within weeks, his empire crumbled. Alexis watched it all unfold with mixed emotions. Vindication, but also scars that still hadn't healed. Serena saw the storm brewing inside her daughter. "He didn't break you," she said one night. "Don't let him live in your head. He's done. You're just getting started." Alexis nodded. She knew this wasn't over. But she finally felt ready. She began preparing for her next tournament. And this time, she wasn't fighting for Nick's approval, or revenge, or to silence the bullies. She was fighting for herself. And she wasn't alone. Serena was right there beside her, not to catch her if she fell, but to remind her she could stand on her own. One morning, Alexis sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched cereal. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, leaving the academy, going public, watching the fallout. But the media wouldn't let go. "Another interview request," Serena said, walking in. "ESPN this time." Alexis's stomach turned. "I don't want to talk about it anymore," she muttered. Serena knelt beside her. "I know it's hard. But this isn't just about you. It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. What if it doesn't change anything?" Serena's voice sharpened. "It will. But only if we keep fighting." Later that day, they stood on a stage. Cameras flashing. Serena spoke first, calm, but fierce. "This isn't just about one coach," she said. "It's about a system that allows abuse to hide in plain sight. That ends today." Then, it was Alexis's turn. Her hands trembled as she gripped the mic. "I thought if I worked hard enough, I could prove I deserved to be there. But no matter what I did, it was never enough." She paused. Swallowed hard. "I'm not weak." Her voice steadied. "And I won't let them make me feel that way ever again." The crowd erupted. But Alexis barely heard them. All she could feel was Serena's hand squeezing hers. Support poured in. From athletes, celebrities, fans. But so did the hate. Some accused Serena of using her daughter for attention. Others said Alexis exaggerated. She tried not to read the comments. But it was impossible not to see some of them. "Why do people hate me?" she asked one night through tears. "They don't," Serena said gently. "They're afraid of what you represent. Your change. And change scares people." The investigation against Nick grew. He stayed defiant. "I did what needed to be done," he said in an interview. "This generation is too soft." But as the evidence mounted, the system finally acted. He was banned for life. Lawsuits followed. His legacy was gone. For Alexis, it wasn't revenge. It was closure. She didn't need his approval anymore. She had her own. And her new coach, Leah Martinez, saw the shift. "You're playing like someone who knows they belong," she said one afternoon. Alexis smiled. "Because I do." Months passed. Alexis kept rising. Winning. Learning. but most of all, healing. She began mentoring younger players, sharing her story, helping others through what she had survived. One afternoon, she noticed a nervous girl sitting alone, clutching her racket. Alexis knelt beside her. "First tournament?" The girl nodded. "Scared?" Another nod. Alexis smiled. "Good. That means you care. Let's make sure you use that." Later, Alexis sat on the patio with Serena, watching the sun dip below the trees. "You're proud of her, aren't you?" Serena asked. Alexis looked up, surprised. "You mean the girl from earlier?" Serena nodded. "Yeah," Alexis said softly. "I think she's going to be great." Serena smiled. Just like her mentor. Alexis leaned back in her chair, letting the moment settle. She had been through fear, through pain, through humiliation. But she came out the other side stronger. And as the sun set behind them, Alexis Olympia Ahanian knew. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And check out our other stories, because sometimes the fight for justice starts with just one voice.